Hello, welcome to Windows Virtual Desktop. Hi everyone. I wanted to walk through the administrative experience for WVD in Azure Government. So I'm just popping into my Azure Government portal. It's portal.azure.us. It's a little bit different than azure.com you may be familiar with if you're not in Azure Government, but the services are generally the same. Sometimes they get there a little later because they need additional accreditation or certification. How WVD works is it's really just an Azure service that knits together all the things that you would need to put a desktop in the cloud. There's a couple of components that are in Windows Virtual Desktop in the portal, and I'll just show you real quick. This is my WVD binary client that I'm running. And we can see that I've got a couple of different workspaces defined, applications and desktop. So this is the client for the client experience. If we pop over to workspaces in the WVD blade in Azure, we'll see that I also have those exact same workspaces available, desktop and applications. What the workspaces are, they are a collection of application groups, and I'll explain what those are and their importance in a minute. On the desktop one, we'll see I only have one application group defined, and it's right here, desktop.dag. It's the default desktop application group that's defined as part of a pool that I have. I'm going to pop back to the applications one. In the applications workspace, I've actually got multiple applications groups. One called Office or O365 apps and one called HPC apps. We'll see that I've got an awful lot of applications defined here within this workspace, and they both are published out of these two application groups. I'll show you the Office 365 one first. First, within here, we've got a bunch of applications that are published. They're primarily Office 365 related apps, Word, Publisher, PowerPoint, Outlook, Teams, all these things. And again, they're coming from a pool of like virtual machines that are all published in a host pool. I'm going to just show you real quick how easy it is to add an application. So the pool is built from VMs or a VM that I've already created and captured and sysprepped and done all those things that you might do if you were publishing a desktop image to a computer. Same kind of deal. If I want to publish an individual app out, it's merely as simple because the VM's already registered with the service of finding any of the apps that are on the start menu that are registered. I'm just going to do 7-zip file manager real quick. Hit publish, hit save. I can put in a description. I can also, if I need to, add command line parameters, hit save, and we see 7-zip managers there. If I go back to the client now, and I hit refresh, it'll actually refresh my feed, and we'll see 7-zip manager has appeared and is available to me. As a user, one of the things I didn't show you in the app group is how things are assigned. So out of this app group, this Office 365 app group, I've assigned it to an Azure Active Directory group. So we use Azure AD essentially to publish these apps and desktops out to users. And I have a group that's WVD users where I keep all of my Windows Virtual Desktop users populated. And it's actually an Active Directory group that I have that's synced up using Azure AD Connect. What I want to show you though is if I go back to the HPC group, just to make the point, the applications that are publishing there are other apps, something I showed you in another video, FreeCAD and ArcGIS and RStudio and stuff like that. But the assignments, instead of being WVD users, I'm using an entirely different group, WVD Additional Apps. These are users that I want to grant access to this other pool of resources beyond what's in the base Office 365 core that all my users would have. And I do that because the VMs I have in this pool are more expensive. They've got different applications, and it's how I would essentially limit access to certain applications in my environment. I'm going to go back now. We looked at the workspaces and how they're built from application groups. We looked at the application groups that I've built, this desktop application group, which of course is in the desktop workspaces piece. And we see that here, right? And then HPC and Office 365 are part of this workspace where all these apps appear. these are all based on host pools or derived from separate host pools. We'll see that I've got 3 different host pools: an Office 365 host pool, an HPC host pool, high performance computing. Those are those more expensive and resource intensive apps, and a desktop host pool where I'm publishing a full desktop experience. I've configured all these as pooled experiences, which means that the VMs that are running in the background can be attached to by any user. Their profile will actually appear and be attached using a technology called FSlogix. And when they log off, the profile will be detached. I'll show you a little bit more about that in a minute. But I'm just going to show you real quick how I might publish a host pool. That might make things a little clearer. If I go in and hit plus, this is me trying to create a group of like VMs that users could access, either applications or a full desktop experience. So I'm going to go into create my host pool name, and I'm going to call it new, which is kind of a silly name for a host pool, but I'll probably delete it soon. I'm going to publish it in Virginia. Whether it's a validation environment or not, that just means that Microsoft can deploy kind of pre-production code to it if you as an administrator wanted to test what the latest changes for Microsoft might be in this environment. I'm going to say no. And then the host pool type, this is where I mentioned the pooled piece versus personal. If I select personal, it's going to assign users to VMs in a one-to-one relationship, and they'll always get back to that same VM. I don't necessarily need to do or use FSlogix for profile management because I can have the profile live locally in those virtual machines. Generally speaking, most WVD deployments, unless they have a technical reason or security reason, are pooled. And pooled allows me, again, to share or have users dynamically assigned to virtual machines and then deallocated from them. But I can also have multiple users get on a VM. So I'll put 10. I'm going to put 10 users on one Windows VM, which is kind of cool. There's also a load balancing algorithm. I can assign users to my VMs either breadth first, where let's say I have 4 VMs in a pool. It'll scatter them around so they can take advantage of the unallocated resources in those VMs, or depth first. What depth first does is it loads up a VM to the limit that I've got specified here before assigning users to the next VM. That's useful if you're doing some sort of power management or dollar related automation to reduce your costs, where you could shut VMs down and not incur costs for that in your environment. Whether you do that or not, that's just a scale up strategy you can deploy. Anyway, I'm going to add VMs to my pool really quickly. We'll see here that I'm adding it to my resource group, my virtual machines. I'm going to give it a prefix called new for my VMs. This is going to function as the name of the VM in Active Directory. So I'm going to make it a 3 VM pool. So it's going to create 3 VMs, new-0 through new-2. And then because I'm going to put 10 users on each VM, I'm going to select a VM size that I think might be appropriate for that. Maybe we'll go with 8 cores. So I'm going to go for a D8S V3. So I'm going to hit that, hit select. And so I'm going to have 32 gigs of RAM and 8 cores for up to 10 users that I'm going to apply. This is the interesting part, is when I'm going to assign my image. In the gallery, and Azure Government has a slightly different OS gallery than what you have in commercial. But what I have is access to something called Windows 10 Enterprise Multi-Session. And what that is it's a version of Windows 10 that's really Azure exclusive. I haven't seen it anywhere else. But it allows you to put multiple users on a VM, kind of similar to an old session-based deployment where you might have used Windows Server or Citrix to deploy out hosts using terminal services, or deploy VM access out via terminal services. But this is actually a high-fidelity Windows 10 experience. So it's got some of the properties of server, but that Windows 10 user experience. And in the gallery, we've also got versions of it that already have Office 365 Pro Plus, which you can use in Azure as well. You don't have rights necessarily because of the lack of license mobility with Office Pro Plus to use it in a lot of other cloud environments. But Azure, if you're an M365 or O365 user, you do have that right. What I'm going to do rather than use this image out of the gallery is I've actually created my own image that I've captured where I've installed additional applications and then put it into my shared image gallery. This is an example of that, and I'm just going to click on that. I could show you later some of the administrative stuff I've done to set up to get that fired up. But anywho, what I'm going to do then is also then select my SSD type. I'm going to go with Premium SSD so I get a little better experience with my performance for my 10-user virtual machines. I can select a network that I want to attach to, whether I give it a public IP address or not. Not a lot of utility or value in giving these VMs public IP addresses because it does create certain security challenges. And there's no reason to make any public inbound ports available since the RDP session is actually going to be an outbound call from the VM back through the connection broker infrastructure. I'm going to attach this to my environment, and by environment I mean my Active Directory, because the VMs that are here, even though we used, and I showed you, we published the experience and the applications and desktops using Azure Active Directory, using folks Office 365 Azure AD credential. The VMs actually participate in Active Directory. So you're going to join the VMs to Active Directory so that you can apply things like group policy objects and manage them appropriately. And then also it means that the users can connect to all the resources that you have in Active Directory. So one requirement that I didn't state earlier when you do these deployments is probably that you're going to have a domain controller in Azure for these VMs to attach to, but also that the Active Directory environment that you have be synchronized, typically using Azure AD Connect to Azure Active Directory. So it's kind of a seamless identity for the end users. No big deal. I can also specify the domain that I might join the VMs to, as well as an OU. A lot of times in BDI environments, and WVD is not unlike a traditional VDI environment, except it's in the cloud and probably more cost effective, is that when you create these VMs, you may be polluting your computer's container. So this is just an opportunity for you to create a different OU in Azure, or excuse me, in Active Directory, and then put those machine accounts there. I'm going to put them in my computer container in Azure. So I'm just going to click on creating my workspace, and I'm not going to have it registered the default app group. I might do something a little nutty with my new group, and then hit review and create. And then once it validates it, because I typed my password in right finally, I can hit create. And for a pool of this size, it's probably going to take, about 10 minutes, 10 to 12 minutes for the VMs to be published. It's not a big pool, and that's a pretty common VM type. And my experience would be those VMs would be published in about 10 minutes. What it's doing is it's taking that image that I had, it's injecting the WVD client and registering it with the host pool, and then also domain joining VMs to my Active Directory domain. Maybe not in that order, but that's kind of what the tasks are that are going to be accomplished as part of this publication. One thing I'm going to show you real quick is I'm going to pop back. We talked a little bit about FSlogix. One of the things that I did when I created my image that I showed you was I installed the FSlogix agent in the VMs. And what that actually does is it allows you to configure it so it'll point to a file share. In this case, I'm using an Azure Files, a storage account, a V2 storage account where I've created a file share called FSlogix. You don't have to call it that. You can call it whatever you want. And I've registered the agent with this file share. And what it does is when the user logs in the first time to a VM that is running the FSlogix agent that's configured, it's going to go out to the file share. And if it doesn't see a directory based on the user's name and credential, their SID, it's going to create one. And they're the only ones who are going to have access to it if you've permissioned it properly. Maybe you'll have administrators have access to it as well. And in that folder, it's going to create a VHD file. And that's a virtual disk file that's Windows compatible that can be mounted in Windows 7 and newer, or Windows Server, new contemporary versions of Windows Server. And that's going to contain the redirected profile components for the user. And the benefit to you as an administrator or to the user is that rather than using something like roaming profiles or file redirection, it's only going to open one file, the VHD file, which is going to significantly reduce the amount of I/O required for the profile to be mounted. So in these pooled environments where we're dynamically assigning VMs to individual users, FSlogix reduces the complexity of profile management and also improves the overall logon performance. So creating an Active Directory compatible, not Azure, compatible configuration for your files is super important. So what I've actually done with this file share is I've joined it to Active Directory so that it'll when the user logs into the VM, and maybe I'm not explaining this clearly enough or appropriately, when they log into Active Directory on the VM, they'll be able to get to that file share using the AD credential that they have, and NTFS permissions are what will be used to kind of enforce all that. You don't have to use Azure Files. You can create an S2D cluster or a standalone file server, but then you got to manage it. But Azure Files is a pretty good way to go. Another way to go that I really like is using Azure Netapp Files, which is a first-party service that leverages Netapp flash storage in Azure. So if you're a Netapp customer, you know what I'm talking about, the ease of configuring it. And I've also created a FSlogix share here on my ANF, my Azure Netapp Files environment. And this is lower latency, higher speed than Azure standard files. It's cost-wise similar to Azure Premium Files. One of the neat things about it is the names for the file shares are a little shorter because they also participate in Active Directory than Azure Files. You can configure it to connect to Active Directory similar to what I did with Azure Files, and I can snapshot it and do all sorts of crazy things. But this is also an option for doing profile management, and one that I've seen for larger deployments, both in Azure Government and Azure Commercial. Let's go check on our provisioning of our pool. And we see now that our new pool appears to have provisioned. Isn't that awesome? Thanks for taking the time to look at the configuration of WVD in Azure Government.